This Shabbos, in shuls around the world, we will be Makayim the mitzvah of Zachor 8 Asher Asalach Amalek Baderach B'tzeitchem Mitzrayim. Remember what Amalek did to you on your journey out of Mitzrayim. That's a particular people from the ancient Near East called Amalek. And yet, as Moiv Rabbi of Pinchas Hirschsprung writes in the introduction to his posthumously published work, he wrote it in Yiddish, translated to English, called Veil of Tears. He writes that while many tried to dissuade him from writing the story of what happened to him at the hands of the Nazis, Yamach Shemam, he feels that by telling these stories, he is Mekayim the mitzvah of Zachor et Asher Asalach Amalek. There's a tradition in the Soloveitchik family that when the Rambam describes the 7 nations, the Shiva Amamin in Canaan, it mentions, the Rambam writes in Hilchot Malachim, Perek Hey, Ukvar Avad Zichram, but their memory has already been lost, meaning these ancient nations no longer exist on planet Earth. But the next halacha hey, v'chein mitzvah aseh la'abed zecher Amalek, it's a positive commandment to destroy the memory of Amalek. Shenemar timcha et zecher Amalek u'mitzvah aseh lizkor tamid ma'asav hara'im va'arevato. It's a positive commandment to constantly recall his wicked actions and his enmity for the Jewish people. And it never mentions that Amalek has dissipated or melted away or disappeared. And so Rabbi Soloveitchik says he has a tradition from his father, of Moshe Soloveitchik, who got it presumably from the grandfather, Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik, that's because Amalek is less about a national identity and more about a nefarious ideology that continues to endure throughout world history. You could say that if we spelled the transliteration of the word Amalek, not ending with a K, but with a Q, as they do in academic circles, that there is a phenomenon known as AmaleQanon that continues to take various forms, but that continues, unfortunately, to endure and trails us like a dark shadow. The late Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Zichrono Livracha, would speak often about anti-Semitism as a virus that mutates. In the classical period, it was a religious anti-Semitism, and the Jews were hated for their religion. In the modern era, a more secular age, came racial anti-Semitism. Nothing the Jew did, but something about the Jewish person's composition, something inalienable about the Jewish people that was opprobrious in the eyes of anti-Semites. And in the postmodern era, the mutation takes on a form of a national identity with the nation state, with the land of Israel and Medinat Israel as such. And therefore, we find ourselves once again coming into a Purim in which Zionism and Israel remain in the dark. During the pandemic, the year of pandemic of 2020, the General Assembly of the United Nations saw it fit to sanction Israel through 17 resolutions. It censored Israel 17 times. And for the rest of the world, including Iran and China and North Korea and Russia and Syria, all of the countries of the world, 192 other member states, 6 resolutions total. The truth is, we deal with various strains of the mutation that have taken on new movements and the like. There's the South African strain of the virus of anti-Semitism. It started in Durban in the year 2001 in the summer. It was overshadowed by the events of 9/11. But look up what happened there at the conference against racism and xenophobia, how so quickly it devolved into an anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist coterminous terms, in most instances, free-for-all, that formed the ideology of what became afterwards several of the campaigns that endure until today against Medinat Israel. See the British strain of the virus that reared its ugly head just this past period of their recent election season of a number of months ago, when the Labour Party was overtaken and led by a rabid anti-Semite. See the strains from France and Belgium and various other countries without going through the whole list. But let's focus this Purim a little bit on the American strain of this virus. It's a virus that mysteriously happens from the left and from the right. It's a virus that includes white nationalists chanting in Charlottesville, Jews will not replace us, you will not replace us. That was in 2017, and that mutated, then that mutation led to violence and murder and destruction in Pittsburgh and Poway. Black nationalists attacked the Jewish people in Jersey City and in Muncie within the last 18 months. And in this winter, the winter of 2020 going into 2021, December, one of the leaders of the Nation of Islam claimed that there are two types of flu vaccine, one containing mercury and other additives, and another without them, quote, for Jewish people and those who are knowledgeable about the chemical additives in these vaccines, end quote. And the idea here, of course, should be clear that there is no side of the political or of the radical elements within our own country that is not beset by this horrific virus. White nationalists and black nationalists, neo-Nazis and adherents to the Nation of Islam, even within the world of politics, see and hear what goes on in the Democratic Party from the mouth of Rashida Tlaib, accidentally sending out a tweet within the last year or so about a blood libel and apologizing, the various statements by Ilhan Omar and others. And now see what goes on in the Republican Party with Marjorie Taylor Greene, who, for some strange reason, saw it fit as a Republican congresswoman from Georgia to speak about tragedy in California of wildfires that she claims were caused by, quote unquote, Jewish space lasers owned by some kind of shadowy Jewish cabal of bankers and a banking family. Read the excellent and brilliant article by Deborah Lipstadt in The Guardian just from a few days ago, in which she speaks about the phenomenon of anti-Semitism, and particularly the way in which Marjorie Taylor Greene was essentially given a pass by her party for her odious ideas. She did not say these things 10 years ago, yet she was on the floor of the House explaining that what she said were words of the past. These are words that she wrote, however, only a few months ago, and claimed that it was a result of research that she had done. And so Deborah Lipstadt explains that unlike racism, which punches down and denigrates the other as being unworthy, anti-Semitism punches up. The Jew, she writes, is supposedly more powerful, ingenious, and financially adept than the non-Jew. Jews use their prodigious skills to advance themselves and harm others. The Jew is not just to be loathed, the Jew is to be feared. Every act of anti-Semitism, from shoving a Jew on the street to murdering them en masse, has this conspiracy at its roots. It was what prompted people in the Middle Ages to believe that Jews had poisoned the wells in order to spread the plague. It was at the heart of the protocol of the Elders of Zion, a well-known forgery that purported to be the records of a meeting of powerful Jews who were scheming to control the world's finances. Nazi anti-Semitism was founded on the notion that Jews were engaged in a deadly conspiracy against the German people. They had the Nazis charged, quote, stab Germany in the back, end quote, during the First World War, thereby engineering its loss, and so on and so forth. AmaleQanon continues to rove planet Earth and continues to be a phenomenon that we need to deal with. And so we go to our Purim, not only with our Zechira, our remembering what Amalek has done to us, but also with a strange directive. Chayav inish libesumi b'poraya, ad lo yada ben ar Haman lebarach Mordechai. A person is obligated to become inebriated to the point where they don't know the difference between cursed be Haman and blessed be Mordechai. Now, on the face of it, that sounds like an invitation to become so inebriated of what's called shichruta shalot, that a person's moral compass has been torn asunder. I don't think that was what was intended, and I think a number of the Achronim actually back up the idea that that is not a healthy approach. But what does it mean? Said the Vilna Gaon, what it means is, ad de lo yada, till you don't know lahavdil ben shnei hanisim. You no longer know how to distinguish between the two miracles. Ben nes de mapalat Haman, the downfall of Haman, which is a miracle, ubein nes de geulat Mordechai, and the miracle of the redemption of Mordechai, and by extension of the Jewish people. The Rav Hutner in the Pachad Yitzchak and Mamar Chav Gimel takes up this statement of the Gra. He wanted to better understand what does it mean not to know the distinction between the rescue and the redemption. And he explains as follows. He says, why did the Gemara teach us that, in fact, Gedola Hasar HaTaba'at, greater was the removal of the ring, the signet ring, off of the hand of Achashverosh than the act and the words of 48 prophets and 7 prophetesses in terms of bringing the Jewish people back on side, if you will, to be more connected again to Torah and mitzvot? Why Davka the ring? What Rav Hutner explains is the following. He says there is something in the Gemara in Masechet Brachot called a brit, a covenant, that is formulated for a person around Yisurin, around suffering. A brit, after all, means something that is joining two parties, two ideas, two things. That's a brit, a covenant. Now, says Rav Hutner, when a person suffers, they actually have two possible brachot that they could recite. One is Dayan Ha'emet, and that is, of course, what we do recite. But from an ideal perspective, it's not just to say that God is the true judge, to acknowledge that which is bad, but on a certain ideal level, we have an abiding faith. Whatever Hashem does is for the best. And so on an ideal level, we could also make the bracha hatov v'hametiv. We don't. We can't bring ourselves to do it. But somewhere deep down, we have some kind of a sense that the back of the tapestry, to use the analogy that we see that has so many threads sticking out in different disparate places and it seems so discordant, one day we'll flip it over. One day at the end of days, we'll be able to see how this was all part of some bigger picture. And so when an individual can accept Yisur and can accept suffering within their heart, having some kind of ideal notion that it's somehow for the best, even as they can't bring themselves even to say such a thing, and they're announcing instead, Baruch Dayan Ha'emet, that's a brit, that's a covenant of the Yisurin between what is today, but also a sense of hope for what can be tomorrow. We have two phenomena, says Rav Hutner, that trouble us in this world. It's not just the phenomenon of tzaddik v'ral, the righteous who suffer. It's also rasha v'tovlo, the wicked who prosper. Usually these happen as two separate events, but on Purim, both of these were a flip side, two sides of the same coin. Shiny Amalek, different is the situation with Amalek, because the removal of the ring itself is what aggrandizes Haman, which empowers Haman, which is the exact moment in which the Jewish people, the tzaddikim, start to feel that their stock is plummeting. And this split and this flip back and forth means, says Rav Hutner, that when we confront Amalek, the existence of Amalek in the world reminds us as a symbol of suffering within the world in general. When Amalek is destroyed, we are able to make the bracha hatov v'hametiv even on something terrible that had nearly happened to us. And the fact that there is now a lack of distinction between the tzaddik v'ralo and rasha v'tovlo, that's unique to our encounter with Amalek, is that the reality is when Amalek rises, we see rasha v'tovlo, and at the same time, we wonder why is tzaddik v'ralo. But when Amalek is destroyed, then we can see a vista into the end of days. The salvation from Amalek is not just, therefore, a salvation from a particular trial or point of suffering. It is a general salvation from evil altogether. Mapalat Haman to Yeshuat Mordechai, says Rav Hutner, Shtayim Shehein Achat. To use the Talmudic terminology, they are two which are truly one. Ad lo yada, says the Vilna Gaon, until one no longer knows between these two miracles, the recognition of the link between these two phenomena. There is AmaleQanon that first came from the mouth of Haman, who described himself to Achashverosh that Am Mefuzar Mefurad Bein Ha'amim. They're a shadowy group that is spread among the 127 provinces. They're scheming, they have a conspiracy, and yet at the same time, on the flip side, it is he who is engaged in conspiracy, he who is engaged in actually creating and fomenting this type of hatred that he imputes to the Jewish people. And so here there is almost a duality, a flip side, two sides of the same coin also between the Jewish people and Amalek in this regard, the claims of the one and the claims of the other. I close with the following story. It's what happened on the day that Haman and his minions signed the letters and sent them around the empire. Esther Rabbah writes that Vayavos Sameach hu v'chol b'nei chavurato, they were walking down the street, just imagine them all in their jackboots, marching down the street in their crisp uniforms, and suddenly they saw in the distance ahead of them Mordechai, upagu b'Mordechai shu holech lifneim, he's going before them. V'ra Mordechai ahead of them, shlosha tinokot shahayu bayim mibeit hasefer. He saw three children who were leaving the yeshiva, the local day school, and he ran after them. Ratz Mordechai achrem. When Haman saw this, Haman was curious. Ushara Haman b'chol chavurato shaya ratz Mordechai achrei tinokot halchu achrei Mordechai ladat ma yisham Mordechai mehem. What will Mordechai ask them? They want to know. And so what happens? Mordechai arrives at the first of these three kids. They're walking together. And he comes to these children. Tell me what you learned today in school. Answers the little boy. We learned the book of Proverbs, the book of Mishlei. Do not fear the sudden terror or the incineration of the wicked when it will come. Here, a destruction of enemies, the downfall of Haman and the Hamanic and the AmaleQanon. Patach Hasheni, the second child, said, Va'amar, Ani kariti hayom v'zeh pasuk amadati beta sefer. I also learned today in school, and the last pasuk that I read in my shir was the following from the book of Yeshaya: Utzu eitzav etufar dabru davar v'liyakum ki imanu keo. Conspire and plot against us, but it will not happen. It will become unraveled. Why? Because Hashem is with us. Patach Hashlishi said the third one, after the second who spoke about conspiracies and plots against the Jewish people. What did the third one say? Va'ad zikna anihu, va'ad seva ani asbol, ani asiti v'ani asa, v'ani asbol va'amaleit. When you grow old, says the Navi, Yeshaya, I will be the same. When your hair turns gray, I will still carry you. I made you, I will bear you, I will carry you, and I will rescue you. Sometimes the fight against anti-Semitism makes us tired. We're weary already, battle weary from so many centuries of it and from its various mutations, but we need to persevere. Indeed, as soon as Mordechai heard this, Kevin Sheshama Mordechai Kach, Sachak ve'asamech simcha gedola, he was overjoyed and he had a great rejoicing. Amar lo Haman, Haman caught up to him. Mahi zot simcha, what's this joy that you have? What is this joy that you have from these children? Amar responded, Mordechai, because they told me good news, that I should not be afraid of the conspiracy, the wicked conspiracy that you are hatching against us. Why is Mordechai joyous? Because he can have a child's faith. Purim calls us to be again engaged in having that child's faith. Purim reminds us of that idea that against the enemies of the Jewish people with their terrible hatreds, we need to find a sense of simcha, of an emunah pshuta, a basic and steadfast sense of faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that somehow kol da'avid Rahman l'tav avid, and that indeed we've overcome everyone until now. And even though we feel sometimes that the world has not yet learned the lessons about the terrible phenomena of anti-Semitism over the years, the reality is that actually we believe ultimately we will see a great day of Yemei Mishta v'Simcha, of great feasting and of great joy at the time of the downfall of Haman. Ad lo yada bein mapalat Haman, Arur Haman, lebein Geulat Baruch Mordechai HaYehudi. Wishing everyone Shabbat Shalom and a Purim filled with Simcha.